Some films haunt you because of their violence. The Hitcher haunts you because of its silence. It opens on an empty stretch of highway, quiet, endless, and unassuming, before slipping into a nightmare that grows heavier with every mile. Released in 1986, the story begins with something as ordinary as giving a stranger a ride. Yet that single act unravels everything, turning a simple road trip into a descent through fear, fate, and the fragility of safety. John Ryder enters the story the way a shadow appears before sunset subtly. Then suddenly, with a presence that feels inevitable. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't rush. He barely moves. And somehow that restraint makes him more frightening than any screaming villain ever could. There's an emptiness to him, a cold vacancy behind the eyes, as if he isn't just a man on the road, but something the road itself summoned. Behind the scenes, the tension didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. The production was shaped by harsh desert conditions, creative clashes near accidents, and decisions so strange they became lore among the crew. Scenes were debated, softened, or buried entirely. The ending went through multiple forms before settling on the one audiences finally saw. And throughout it all, the cast and crew worked in isolation, surrounded by a landscape so vast and indifferent that it became a character of its own. What emerged wasn't just a thriller. It was a story about vulnerability, about how quickly a moment of kindness can spiral into catastrophe, and how hard it is to escape a threat that feels less like a person and more like an omen. Tonight we open that road once more. These are 20 weird, chilling, and long-hidden truths behind The Hitcher. 96 details that reveal just how strange the journey behind the film really was. Fact 1. The actor who became dangerous without doing anything loud. From the moment Rutger Hauer stepped onto the set, the atmosphere changed. He didn't need to speak loudly, threaten anyone, or lean into theatrics to unsettle those around him. His portrayal of John Ryder began with stillness, controlled, patient, unnervingly calm. Crew members described the feeling of standing next to him as similar to standing near a quiet storm, one that hasn't broken yet but promises to. See, Thomas Howell later admitted that he avoided being too close to Hauer between takes. It wasn't hostility. It was the tension that surrounded Hauer whenever he slipped into character. His eyes carried a weight and analytical sharpness that made even simple exchanges feel loaded. Whenever he walked into a scene, conversation softened, movement slowed, and people instinctively watched him without knowing why. Hauer pushed for ambiguity. He refused to rehearse certain confrontations, believing Ryder should feel unpredictable, even to the actors sharing the frame. He declined to give the character a backstory, insisting that the mystery made him more powerful. The director agreed, encouraging him to treat Ryder less like a human antagonist and more like a presence that simply exists, inevitable, immovable, implacable. By the second week of filming, Hauer no longer needed dialogue or dramatic motion to create tension. His silence carried enough threat. His stillness felt like a warning. He didn't have to act violent. People sensed the danger long before the camera started rolling. Fact 2. The scene the studio feared would destroy the entire film. Every controversial film has one moment that studio executives lose sleep over. For The Hitcher, it was the infamous truck sequence. An image so raw and so emotionally cruel that even hardened screeners flinched. The scene wasn't merely violent. It was psychologically merciless, the kind that leaves audiences frozen rather than entertained. During the first internal screening, the room reacted immediately. Some gasped. Others turned away. A few quietly walked out. Surprisingly, when questioned afterward, those same viewers said the film wouldn't work without the scene. It defined Ryder. It defined the stakes. It made the story feel terrifyingly real. The studio disagreed. They demanded cuts, edits, safer angles, anything to soften the impact. But every alteration stripped the moment of its meaning. Ryder became less threatening. Jim's helplessness became less devastating. The film's entire emotional arc began to collapse. The director fought back, defending the scene as essential to the film's identity. Eventually, they reached a razor-thin compromise. The sequence would stay trimmed to the most minimal number of frames possible while retaining its dreadful weight. Even then, several countries banned it or demanded additional edits. Some theaters refused to show the film at all, unless the moment was removed. Ironically, the scene the studio feared most became the one that kept the film alive, because viewers couldn't stop talking about it. Fact 3. A highway shoot. So risky the crew braced for real catastrophe. The film's lonely stretches of highway look atmospheric on screen, but shooting there proved far more dangerous than anyone expected. The production chose real desert roads, isolated, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Cell service was non-existent. Weather changed without warning, and every scene involving vehicles demanded a level of precision that bordered on reckless. Actors and stunt drivers performed at real highway speeds, often inches from each other, with limited rehearsal due to the tight schedule. C. Thomas Howell recalled moments where he could feel the rush of a truck passing so close that the air pressure nearly knocked him sideways. There was no safety net, only trust instinct and luck. Windstorms made everything worse. They swept across the set, suddenly blasting sand at exposed equipment, rattling lights, and obscuring visibility. One violent gust toppled a lighting tower, missing a stunt driver by a margin so small it silenced the entire crew. After that, every piece of equipment was double-weighted, anchored, and watched constantly. The most terrifying incident occurred during a night shoot. Dust clouds swallowed the headlights, turning the road into a shifting tunnel of darkness. A stunt car fishtailed unexpectedly, skidding toward a camera operator. The vehicle stopped mere feet away. Production halted for hours as everyone regained their composure. The danger wasn't a cinematic illusion. It lived in every mile of desert highway the crew stepped onto. Fact 4. The early script was so relentlessly dark that studios backed away instantly. Before The Hitcher became a film, it existed as a screenplay that made executives deeply uneasy. The earliest version didn't simply imply Ryder's darkness, it immersed the reader in it. His dialogue was longer, colder, and far more philosophical. He spoke about suffering with detached fascination, framing violence as if it were a test delivered by fate itself. Some scenes hinted at ritualistic behavior, as though Ryder followed an internal logic only he understood. The draft was so bleak that multiple studios rejected it within days. One reader described it as a descent with no light, claiming the script offered no moral anchor for audiences to hold on to. The villain had no motive, no trauma, no origin, just an unsettling calmness that made his actions feel disturbingly possible. Yet the writer and director believed that very bleakness gave the story its power. They made revisions to secure funding, trimming several monologues and removing a handful of deeply disturbing sequences. But they refused to give Ryder a traditional backstory. Offering clarity, they argued, would weaken the entire essence of the character. Some scenes were softened, yes, but the core remained untouched. Ryder stayed unknowable, unexplainable, and unstoppable. To this day, those who read the original script insist it was even more haunting than the finished film. Sometimes the darkest versions never make it to the screen. Fact 5. A single improvised line that shifted the entire tone of the villain. Rutger Hauer didn't build John Ryder through rehearsals or method rituals. He built him through instinct. During a tense scene when the script demanded cold intensity, but the moment felt incomplete, Hauer delivered a line that wasn't written anywhere. It was soft, unexpected, eerily calm, and it changed the room instantly. See, Thomas Howell later said he froze for a second, unsure whether Hauer was still acting or slipping into something more personal. The director saw the footage and immediately recognized its potency. The line distilled the essence of the villain: quiet conviction, chilling clarity, and an unsettling sense of purpose. This improvisation became a reference point. Hauer began weaving similar subtleties into his performance. Brief pauses, long stares, tiny shifts in posture. He avoided any showmanship. He played Ryder with the confidence of someone who believes he already knows how every moment will end. The script gave structure. Hauer gave him a soul-cold, deliberate, and unforgettable. That single improvised moment didn't just enhance Ryder, it crystallized him. Fact 6. Isolation on the desert roads created problems no one expected. The desert highways chosen for the Hitcher gave the film its distinctive sense of emptiness, but that isolation came at a price. The crew often worked miles from the nearest town, surrounded by land that seemed to swallow sound and distort distance. Communication devices failed constantly. Radios hissed with static. Signals vanished without warning. Some departments disappeared from contact for hours at a time. One grip truck broke down on a remote stretch of road, leaving several crew members stranded in brutal heat, until another vehicle happened upon them. Another day, a stunt coordinator ventured off to scout terrain and vanished behind a ridge. The crew didn't find him until sunset, disoriented and claiming he couldn't hear their shouts because the wind twisted every sound. At night, the desert became unnervingly quiet. Crew members described hearing faint footsteps when no one was nearby or seeing quick shadows move outside the reach of their headlights. Whether tricks of the environment or the result of exhaustion, the experiences left many on edge. This isolation seeped into the performances as well. The cast was already tense before the cameras rolled, already immersed in the fear and uncertainty the film demanded. The desert didn't just host the story, it shaped it. Fact 7. A soundtrack built on tension, hidden between notes. Most thrillers rely on music to drive tension forward. But The Hitcher does the opposite. Its score is defined by what you don't hear. Composer Mark Isham built the film's soundscape on sparse tones, faint pulses, and near silence, crafting an atmosphere that feels less like music and more like something breathing beneath the desert. Isham believed that leaving space large, uncomfortable echoing space would heighten dread. Instead of melodies, he layered stretched metallic noises, slowed down wind recordings, and low-frequency vibrations that hovered just below conscious awareness. Watching the film, you don't follow a musical progression. You sense a presence pressing inward. Much of the score originally planned for major scenes was removed entirely. The director preferred letting the crunch of gravel, the hum of an engine, or the emptiness of the highway carry the weight. Isham had no intention of giving Ryder a recognizable theme. He argued that someone without motive shouldn't have musical identity either. The studio questioned the minimalism, insisting the soundtrack felt unfinished. But the director defended the approach, explaining that fear thrives in silence. The result is a score that never tells the audience what to feel. It simply reminds them how exposed the open road can be. Fact 8. The breakdown scene that pushed the lead actor to his emotional edge. C. Thomas Howell's portrayal of Jim Halsey feels painfully authentic because at times it wasn't acting at all. One emotional collapse scene pushed him past the threshold of performance, leaving the cast and crew momentarily unsure whether the fear on his face was scripted or real. The director encouraged him to abandon traditional acting techniques and let the exhaustion, isolation, and stress of the shoot bleed into the moment. When the camera rolled, Howell's breath fractured, his voice thinned, and his posture collapsed inward. Nothing about it felt staged. When the director finally called cut, Howell didn't return to himself immediately. He walked away, sat on the dirt shoulder of the road, and stared into the distance as though the scene hadn't ended. For almost an hour, he spoke to no one. Crew members hovered nearby but didn't interfere. The moment felt too fragile to disrupt. Howell later said it felt as though everything closed in, as if he was trapped in Jim's fear rather than interpreting it. The director considered rewriting future scenes to reduce emotional strain. But Howell insisted on continuing on his own terms. Some performances rise from technique. This one rose from a moment of genuine unraveling. Fact 9. A deleted scene that would have given Ryder a past he never needed. Buried in early edits was a scene that, had it remained, would have changed the film's entire tone. In this moment, Jim searches Ryder's belongings and finds a battered photograph, a family standing beside a car on a lonely road, their faces violently scratched out. On the back, written in rushed handwriting, were the words, "Remember why." The implication was obvious. Ryder had a history, possibly a loss or trauma that pushed him into violence. It offered a clear motivation, a path toward understanding him. But when shown to early viewers, the scene had the opposite effect of what the filmmakers hoped. Instead of adding depth, it reduced the character's power. Ryder became too human, too explainable. Rutger Hauer strongly objected to the moment. He believed Ryder should be a void, not a victim. A presence, not a person. Once the audience began to understand him, they would fear him less. The director agreed. The photograph was removed, the backstory erased, and the mystery restored. The film became stronger for it. Some villains grow scarier when you know where they came from. Ryder becomes terrifying only when you never find out. Fact 10. The ending you saw was not the ending first imagined. The conclusion of The Hitcher appears decisive, swift, brutal, and final. But the earliest drafts of the script envisioned something far more unsettling. Originally, the story was meant to end with an image that refused closure, Jim sitting in shock beside the wreckage, while the camera drifted past him, revealing that Ryder's body was gone. No explanation, no final confirmation, just the suggestion that the danger wasn't over and that perhaps it never could be. Studio executives balked at this idea. They believed audiences needed a sense of resolution after such relentless tension. An ambiguous ending, they argued, would leave viewers angry, not haunted. The director disagreed, insisting that leaving Ryder's fate uncertain would elevate him from a villain to a myth, an omen rather than a man. Intense debates followed. A compromise was ultimately reached. The filmed ending would appear final, but without lingering too long on Ryder's body. No pulse check, no confirmation, just a quick visual and a focus on Jim's reaction. The ambiguity was softened, but not erased. A sliver of uncertainty remained in the frame, quietly preserving the original intent. Years later, the director admitted that his preferred ending was the one the audience never saw, a version where Ryder's absence said more than any confrontation could. Even in the final cut, the road doesn't feel safe when the story ends. It feels like he could step back onto it at any moment. Fact 11. Police departments objected to the film for a reason the filmmakers never expected. When The Hitcher was released, several real police departments voiced concerns. Yet their objections weren't about violence or depiction of crime. Instead, they were troubled by how easily Ryder bypassed trained officers. He slips from custody, anticipates their movements, and undermines their procedures with unnerving ease. To some departments, this suggested an image of law enforcement as vulnerable, fallible, and easily manipulated. Letters and internal notes sent to the studio expressed frustration that the film portrayed officers as overwhelmed by a lone hitchhiker. One department claimed it made police appear structurally unprepared. Another said Ryder's ability to escape custody undermined public confidence. The filmmakers pushed back, explaining that Ryder was intentionally crafted as a force beyond normal logic. He wasn't meant to represent a real criminal. He was meant to represent unpredictability itself. To reinforce authenticity, actors playing officers followed real protocol, making the contrast between Ryder's calm precision and the officer's structured responses even more striking. Ironically, audiences didn't interpret the film the way police feared. Instead of seeing law enforcement as incompetent, viewers saw Ryder as something closer to supernatural, a threat who operated outside the boundaries of normal human behavior. The controversy eventually faded, but it revealed something powerful. Ryder unsettled not only the characters in the film, but the institutions watching from the outside. Fact 12. The most dangerous chase was filmed with no modern safety systems. The film's most iconic chase sequence, an intense nighttime pursuit across a desolate highway, was captured with no CGI, minimal stunt rigging, and almost no modern safety oversight. Everything audiences see on screen happened at real speed, under real conditions, with nothing separating the cast and crew from potential disaster except timing and instinct. The desert night made visibility almost non-existent. Dust rose from the pavement and hovered in the air like a shifting fog, scattering headlights and hiding the road ahead. Stunt drivers relied on split-second decisions as their only protection. The cinematographer later described the experience as filming inside a moving tunnel where the walls kept changing. A near accident became infamous among those who worked on the sequence. During a sharp maneuver, a stunt car skidded sideways toward a camera operator positioned dangerously close to the curb. The vehicle stopped only feet away, leaving the crew frozen in terror. The footage from that moment was so authentic that the director refused to cut it. Modern production crews would have used digital effects and controlled environments. The Hitcher had neither. It had speed, darkness, dust, and the courage of stunt teams who risked everything to capture the shot. The danger wasn't simulated. It's carved into every frame of that chase. Fact 13. The casting choice that changed the film forever. It's strange to imagine the Hitcher without Rutger Hauer yet. When casting first began, his name wasn't even in the pile. The studio preferred familiar faces actors who could bring charm, marketability, or mainstream appeal. But the director wasn't looking for recognizability. He wanted presence. Someone who could unsettle a room before saying a word. When Hauer's candid photo arrived, something shifted. He wasn't posed, styled, or performing. He was simply looking into the camera with a gaze that felt sharp enough to hold. The director stopped flipping through headshots. The search was over before Hauer even walked into the room, but the audition cemented the decision. While other actors delivered the script with emotion or aggression, Hauer did nearly nothing. He spoke softly, leaving deliberate pauses that made the silence feel heavier than the dialogue itself. His stillness didn't suggest calm, it suggested control. People in the room felt watched, measured, quietly examined. That was the moment the director realized Hauer wasn't just capable of playing Ryder. He was the only person who could make the character believable. He didn't need theatrics. He didn't need exposition. His presence alone carried the threat. Cast someone else, and the movie would have been a thriller. Cast Hauer, and it became a myth. Fact 14. The onset incident that no one could explain. One of the eeriest moments during production had nothing to do with actors' stunts or staged horror. It happened while preparing for a simple roadside shot, one that should have taken minutes. The desert was calm. The air was still. Equipment was in place. Then, a metal road sign several yards away snapped off its post and crashed violently onto the ground. The sound echoed across the landscape, stopping conversations mid-sentence. Crew members jumped back instinctively, scanning for a truck, a gust of wind, or anything that might explain the sudden collapse. There was nothing. When they inspected the metal, the post showed no signs of damage or stress. No cracks. No corrosion. The base looked intact, as if the sign had been forced from its position by an invisible blow. Later, during playback of a camera test, someone noticed a faint shadow pass across the sign moments before it fell. It was thin fast and gone before anyone could identify it. Technicians dismissed it as lens flare. But several crew members weren't convinced. The shooting area had been secured. No one had been standing there. The director shrugged it off to keep morale steady, but the mood on set shifted. A few crew members avoided that section of road after sundown. Others joked uneasily that Ryder had joined them for the day. Some accidents have explanations. This one never did. Fact 15. The moral panic that accidentally made the film a legend. When The Hitcher premiered, it didn't spark polite discussion. It sparked outrage. Critics called it depraved, unjustifiable, and a film without a conscience. Advocacy groups argued that it glamorized random violence, insisting it was too dark for audiences and too bleak for theaters. Reviewers attacked the film not for what it explained, but for what it refused to explain. They couldn't accept Ryder's lack of motive. They couldn't accept a villain who acted without trauma ideology, revenge, or reason. For many viewers, that emptiness made him more disturbing than any masked slasher or monstrous creature. To critics, it was irresponsible. To the filmmakers, it was honesty. Evil doesn't always come with a user manual. The backlash spread quickly. Protests formed. Articles condemned the film's tone. Some theaters cut back showings. Ironically, this push to silence the movie is what gave it momentum. Anyone told not to watch something suddenly wanted to. Curiosity grew. VHS rentals climbed. Film students screened it at midnight. Horror fans traded copies like contraband. The very outrage that tried to bury the Hitcher is what ultimately kept it alive. The film didn't rise above controversy. It fed on it and became a cult classic because of it. Fact 16. The ancient road legend that quietly influenced the story. Long before the Hitcher existed, tales circulated through European folklore about mysterious wanderers who appeared on lonely roads. These figures had no names, no histories, and no clear motives. They arrived without warning and tested the people they encountered, sometimes through riddles, sometimes through silent intimidation, sometimes through violent judgment. These legends didn't build villains, they built omens. Writers behind the Hitcher later acknowledged they were drawn to these myths, especially stories of the wandering stranger. In old folk tales, this figure wasn't simply a danger. He was a mirror, a force that exposed fear, weakness, or fate through his presence alone. Those who met him often returned changed or never returned at all. John Ryder fits this archetype perfectly. He emerges from nowhere, offers no explanation for his cruelty, and treats Jim Halsey less like a victim and more like a subject in a test neither of them asked for. He behaves as though the road itself sent him, as though their encounter was predetermined rather than accidental. This mythic influence is never spoken aloud, but it shapes every aspect of the film. Ryder is terrifying not because he acts like a madman, but because he acts like something older. Something that has walked countless roads, wearing countless faces, repeating the same inevitable pattern. He isn't just a stranger. He's the echo of a warning centuries older than the highway. Fact 17. A prop gun misfire that produced a moment of genuine fear. One of the film's most intense sequences involves Jim surrounded by armed officers, his nerves fraying as chaos erupts around him. What the audience doesn't know is that during one take, a real on-set mishap pushed the actor past the boundaries of performance. A prop gun loaded with blanks was supposed to fire at a controlled volume. Instead, a mechanical error caused it to discharge far louder and closer than anyone expected. The blast startled the entire crew, but it hit C. Thomas Howell hardest. His reaction, his sudden flinch, wide-eyed shock, and halted breathing wasn't scripted. It was pure reflex, a moment where adrenaline surged faster than thought. Several crew members rushed toward him, fearing debris or malfunction had caused harm. Howell wasn't physically injured, but he was shaken to the core. He later admitted the explosion blurred the edges between fiction and reality, making him feel for a brief moment that the world around him had snapped open. Production paused while he recovered. Even after returning to set, he carried a raw tension that lingered in his performance for the rest of the shoot. The director reviewed the footage afterward and immediately knew it couldn't be recreated. The authenticity was too powerful. That take, the one born from an accident, remains in the final film. Sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't acted, they're survived. Fact 18. The abandoned cars on set had histories more disturbing than expected. To capture the desolate atmosphere of the open road, the production sourced real abandoned cars from impound lots and desert scrapyards. These weren't sanitized as studio props. They were relics of real incidents, carrying dense stains and fragments of lives left behind. Their presence added texture to the film, but also an eerie energy that unnerved many crew members. One rusted sedan still held shattered glass embedded in the upholstery. Another contained a glove compartment full of old gas receipts spanning hundreds of miles, hinting at a frantic journey that ended abruptly. A pickup truck arrived with a child sticker fading on the rear window, its interior filled with sand as though it had been left exposed for years. But the most unsettling discovery came from a vehicle with deep scratch marks inside the trunk. Long, desperate lines carved into the metal. No documentation explained how the car ended up abandoned, and no one on the crew wanted to speculate too deeply. Props teams cleared personal items, but left the car's weathered conditions intact. The director believed their authenticity contributed to the film's realism, insisting they remain untouched. Crew members admitted they didn't like being near the vehicles after dark. They felt heavy, like they carried unfinished stories. Sad ones, violent ones, forgotten ones. The cars weren't just background details. They were silent witnesses, each holding a mystery more unsettling than anything written in the script. Fact 19. The unidentified figure caught on camera, but missing from the set. During editing, the post-production team stumbled on something they couldn't explain. In a wide landscape shot of the desert highway, a solitary figure stood in the far background, motionless, silent, and facing the camera. At first glance, it appeared to be a crew member who had accidentally wandered into frame. Yet when the assistant director reviewed the call sheet and checked with every department, no one claimed responsibility. The figure didn't move as the camera panned. It didn't shift glance away or adjust posture. It simply remained still, as though rooted in the sand. When the editor zoomed in, the outline became clearer. A long coat, squared shoulders, head slightly tilted. But the details never sharpened enough to identify a face. What disturbed the team most was the fact that this wasn't a busy location. The area had been locked down for the shoot. No hikers, no passing drivers, no stray pedestrians. And when the angle changed seconds later, the figure vanished completely. No footprints, no dust cloud, nothing. Removing the figure wasn't an option. The technology wasn't available without risking damage to the shot. The director chose to keep it, arguing that the unexplained presence added to the film's unsettling atmosphere. Some crew members insisted it was a heat distortion. Others believed someone had walked into frame without being noticed. But a few quietly wondered if something or someone else had been standing in the desert that day. The figure has never been identified. It appears once, then disappears forever. Fact 20. A box office failure that accidentally turned into a cult triumph. When The Hitcher was released, the studio expected modest success. Instead, it stumbled. Critics were harsh, audiences were uncertain, and theaters had trouble describing a film that didn't behave like a traditional thriller. The movie didn't offer comforting explanations or familiar formulas. It simply confronted viewers with a villain who defied logic and left them unsettled. The theatrical run was short, and by Hollywood standards, disappointing. But what seemed like failure became the spark for something much bigger. Once the film hit late-night television and VHS shelves, it found an audience that embraced its strangeness rather than fear it. Without marketing teams framing expectations, viewers approached the film blindly, often alone, often at night, and discovered something far more intense than the studio ever advertised. Word spread slowly, quietly, and persistently. Tape collectors traded copies. College film clubs screened it at midnight. Horror fans recommended it in whispers, calling it the road movie that crawls under your skin. Its reputation grew not through hype, but through shared fascination. The same ambiguity that confused critics became the film's greatest strength. Ryder's lack of motive, the bleakness of the desert, the absence of answers. These elements kept viewers returning, debating, imagining. In the end, The Hitcher didn't earn cult status despite its poor release. It earned cult status because of it, because it was too strange, too dark, and too uncompromising for the mainstream crowd who first rejected it. Bonus fact, the audition tape that was so disturbing, it quietly disappeared. Before Rutger Hauer was chosen as John Ryder, The casting team reviewed an audition that left such an unsettling impression that it was quietly removed from circulation. The actor's identity was never confirmed. His paperwork was misplaced, and those who watched the tape described it as one of the most unnerving performances they had ever encountered. Unlike Hauer's controlled menace, this unknown actor delivered Ryder with a volatile, unpredictable energy. He began the scene softly, almost gently, but shifted without warning into sudden bursts of aggression, slamming the table, leaning toward the camera, and speaking in tones that felt less like acting and more like intrusion. A casting assistant later admitted she felt physically unsafe in the room, even though nothing dangerous actually happened. What disturbed the team most was the ending. After finishing the scripted lines, the actor didn't drop character. Instead, he stared into the lens with a hollow stillness that lasted far too long. No blinking, no expression, no movement. The camera operator asked if he was finished. He didn't respond. He simply kept staring, forcing everyone watching to sit in silence. When the tape finally cut, the room stayed quiet. Someone whispered, "We can't put that on film." The director agreed, not because the actor lacked talent, but because the version of Ryder he portrayed felt too unhinged, too chaotic, too real. It would have changed the entire tone of the movie into something far darker than the script intended. The tape was archived and never seen again. Some believe it was lost during studio storage transitions. Others think someone removed it on purpose. All that survives is the memory of a Ryder who even the creators feared releasing into the world. The open road has always promised escape, a straight line into possibility. But the Hitcher reminds us that even the emptiest highway can hold something waiting just beyond the headlights. A stranger, a choice, a moment you can never take back. If these hidden stories change the way you see the film or the way you think about long, lonely drives, tell me in the comments which fact lingered with you the most. And feel free to suggest the next film whose shadows you want us to explore. Some journeys end when the engine stops. Others keep following you long after the screen goes dark.